Once the Public Health Service authorizes its release, the polio vaccine can begin to protect American youngsters. In 1955, over 10 million children received one or more injections of Salk vaccine. For maximum protection from paralytic polio, 3 inoculations. The second given not less than 2 weeks after the first. The third not less than 7 months later. Your child or any member of your family eligible for polio vaccine in your community should be vaccinated now. Vaccination now will save lives from death or paralysis this year. Make use of increasing supplies of vaccine. Help your child grow up strong and straight, free from crippling polio.
So what's in a vaccine anyway? Well, we start with chicken embryos. We then generally add live virus for which we're creating the vaccine for, though sometimes we use a dead one. Next, we add a touch of formaldehyde. You know, like embalming fluid. Like the dead frog juice from biology class. Next, to make sure everything's kosher in there, we add a few antibiotics, because who knows what's swimming around in there. And while we're at it, we add some ether, a little bit of detergent. This is only a little more potent than your typical laundry detergent. And then finally, we get to the good stuff. Adjuvants and preservatives, generally mercury in the form of thimerosal, squalene, aluminium salts, aluminum phosphate and aluminum hydroxide, and other heavy metals and preservatives. So let's talk about what these adjuvants and preservatives really are. What is an adjuvant? The word adjuvant comes from the Latin word adjuvere, meaning to help or to aid. In immunology, an adjuvant is an agent that may stimulate the immune system and increase a response to a vaccine, without having any specific antigenic effect in itself. An immunologic adjuvant is defined as any substance that acts to accelerate, prolong, or enhance antigen-specific immune responses when used in combination with specific vaccine antigens. In the scientific community, adjuvants have whimsically been called the dirty little secret of vaccines. This dates from the early days of commercial vaccine manufacture, when significant variations in the effectiveness of different batches of the same vaccine were observed, correctly assumed to be due to the contamination of the reaction vessels, or humans. However, it was soon found that more scrupulous attention to cleanliness actually seemed to reduce the effectiveness of vaccines, and that the contaminants, or dirt, actually enhanced the immune response. There are many known adjuvants in widespread use today, including oils, aluminum salts, and virisomes, although precisely how they work is still not entirely understood. Adjuvants in immunology are often used to modify or augment the effects of a vaccine by stimulating the immune system to respond to the vaccine more vigorously, and thus providing increased immunity to a particular disease. Because immune systems have evolved to recognize these specific antigenics, the presence of an adjuvant in conjunction with the vaccine can greatly increase the innate immune response to the antigen by augmenting the activities of the dendritic cells, DCs, lymphocytes, and macrophages by mimicking a natural infection. Now, this is the scientific explanation, but let's look at what these adjuvants really do to the human body. First, let's take a look at squalene, the most notorious of these adjuvants. Micropaleontologist Dr. Vera Scheibner conducted research into the adverse effects of adjuvants in vaccines and wrote, "Squalene contributed to the cascade of reactions called Gulf War syndrome. GIs developed arthritis, fibromyalgia, lymphadenopathy, rashes and photosensitive rashes, malar rashes, chronic fatigue, chronic headaches, abnormal body hair loss, non-healing skin lesions, aphthous ulcers, dizziness, weakness, memory loss, seizures, mood changes, neuropsychiatric problems, antithyroid effects, anemia, elevated erythrocyte sedimentation rate, or ESR, systematic lupus erythematosus, multiple sclerosis, deadly amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Raynaud's phenomenon with paroxysms of lack of blood in fingers and toes, Sjögren's syndrome with blurred vision, chronic diarrhea, night sweats, and low-grade fever." The anthrax vaccines I had in the military damaged my health. I live in a world of chronic pain and numerous other problems. Thousands of veterans have died from the vaccine, and hundreds of thousands are crippled. Please do not take these vaccines. You do not want to go from being healthy to being chronically ill. It is a nightmare. This was taken from a website forum where veterans were discussing vaccines. Author unknown. A study linking squalene, an experimental vaccine adjuvant, to individuals with the clinical signs of Gulf War syndrome was published in 2002. A U.S. federal judge ruled that there was good cause to believe squalene to be harmful, and he ordered the Pentagon to stop administering it in October of 2004. Immunologist Dr. Pamela Asa first recognized autoimmune diseases showing up in GIs that mirrored those in lab animals injected with oil-formulated squalene adjuvants. Gary Matsumoto is a New York-based award-winning investigative journalist. His 2004 book, Vaccine A, The Covert Government Experiment That's Killing Our Soldiers and Why GIs Are Only the First Victims, took sharp issue with IOM results and the Pentagon's denial of Gulf War syndrome. According to Matsumoto, today, squalene adjuvants are a key ingredient in a whole new generation of vaccines intended for mass immunization around the globe. Squalene is not just a molecule found in a knee or elbow, it is found throughout the nervous system and the brain. When injected in the body, the immune system attacks it as an enemy to be eliminated. Eating and digesting squalene isn't a problem, but injecting it galvanizes the immune system into attacking it, which can produce self-destructive cross-reactions against the same molecule in the places where it occurs naturally in the body, and where it is critical to the health of the nervous system. Once this systematic self-destruction sequence is induced in the body, it doesn't ever stop. The body continues to naturally make the molecule that the immune system is now trained to attack and destroy. Matsumoto says, squalene is kind of a trigger for a real biological weapon, what Soviet researchers called a biological time bomb. He and Dr. Pam Asa conclude that oil adjuvants are the most insidious chemical weapon ever devised, including ones with squalene. So what American scientists conceived as a vaccine booster, or what's now being developed in labs, was another nano bomb, instigating chronic, unpredictable, and debilitating disease. Using squalene in vaccines is outlandish and criminal. Investigating the shadowy vaccination development world, he discovered U.S. military-employed doctors and scientists conducted secret medical experiments on U.S. citizens in violation of the Nuremberg Code and fundamental medical ethics. According to Matsumoto, by injecting soldiers, the Pentagon violated these and other standards, betrayed the troops, as well as the fundamental duty of military and civilian leaders to protect them. Since at least 1987, biowarfare development trumped the welfare of tens of thousands of GIs used as human guinea pigs for inoculation with experimental, unlicensed anthrax vaccines containing squalene, administered involuntarily without disclosure of its harmful effects to human health. Matsumoto also wrote, "The unethical experiments detailed in this book are ongoing, with little prospect of being self-limiting because they have been shielded from scrutiny and public accountability by national security concerns. Other research shows that squalene is the experimental anthrax vaccine ingredient that caused devastating autoimmune diseases and deaths for many Gulf War veterans from the US, UK, and Australia. Yet it continues to be used today and implemented in new vaccine development in most pharmaceutical labs. There are now data in more than 24 peer-reviewed scientific papers from 10 different laboratories in the US, Europe, Asia, and Australia documenting that squalene-based adjuvants can induce autoimmune diseases in animals, observed in mice, rats, guinea pigs, and rabbits. Matsumoto's book includes numerous case studies of GIs afflicted with one or more of the above syndromes, their devastating effects, and the outlandish U.S. government reaction, completely failing to acknowledge their existence or a connection between them and the administered vaccines, while also denying the effects of other toxic Gulf theater exposures like depleted uranium, as well as withholding meaningful treatments or protocols. So why does Washington continue to sanction its use? According to Matsumoto, scientists in the United States are now literally invested in squalene. Disturbingly, many of the cutting-edge vaccines currently in development by the NIH, or National Institute of Health, and its corporate partners contain squalene in one formation or another. There is squalene in the prototype recombinant vaccines for HIV, malaria, herpes, influenza, including the swine flu strain, cytomegalovirus, and human papillomavirus. Some of these are intended for mass immunizations around the globe, and that possibility should terrify anyone enough to refuse any mandate or doctor's prescription to take them. So, are you angry yet? You should be. But if you're not, let's talk about the greatest political weapon ever conceived: children. Thimerosal is a type of preservative used in vaccines which is made from deadly mercury. A study published in the Toxicological and Environmental Chemistry Journal in June of 2009 showed that the mercury-based compound used as a vaccine preservative, known as thimerosal, induces neural damage similar to that seen in autism patients. According to the study, thimerosal-induced cellular damage led to concentration and time-dependent mitochondrial damage, reduced oxidative reduction activity, cellular degeneration, and cell death. Put simply, this describes autism.
In 1997, a team of research scientists demonstrated that mercury vapor inhalation by animals produced a molecular lesion in brain protein metabolism, which was similar to a lesion seen in 80% of Alzheimer's diseased brains. Recently completed experiments by scientists at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Medicine now reveal, with direct visual evidence from brain neuron tissue cultures, how mercury ions actually alter the cell membrane structure of developing neurons. To better understand mercury's effect on the brain, let us first illustrate what brain neurons look like and how they grow. In this animation, we see 3 brain neurons growing in a tissue culture, each with a central cell body and numerous neurite processes. At the end of each neurite is a growth cone where structural proteins are assembled to form the cell membrane. 2 principal proteins involved in growth cone function are actin, which is responsible for the pulsating motion seen here, and tubulin, a major structural component of the neurite membrane. During normal cell growth, tubulin molecules link together end to end to form microtubules, which surround neurofibrils, another structural protein component of the neuronal axon. Shown here is the neurite of a live neuron isolated from snail brain tissue, displaying linear growth due to growth cone activity. It is important to note that growth cones in all animal species, ranging from snails to humans, have identical structural and behavioral characteristics, and use proteins of virtually identical composition. In this experiment, neurons also isolated from snail brain tissue were grown in culture for several days, after which very low concentrations of mercury were added to the culture medium for 20 minutes. Over the next 30 minutes, the neurite membrane underwent rapid degeneration, leaving behind the denuded neurofibrils seen here. In contrast, other heavy metals added at this same concentration, such as aluminum, lead, cadmium, and manganese, did not produce this effect. To understand how mercury causes this degeneration, let us return to our illustration. As mentioned before, tubulin proteins link together during normal cell growth to form the microtubules which support the neurite structure. When mercury ions are introduced into the culture medium, they infiltrate the cell and bind themselves to newly synthesized tubulin molecules. More specifically, the mercury ions attach themselves to the binding site reserved for guanosine triphosphate, or GTP, on the beta subunit of the affected tubulin molecules. Since bound GTP normally provides the energy which allows tubulin molecules to attach to one another, mercury ions bound to these sites prevent tubulin proteins from linking together. Consequently, the neurite's microtubules begin to disassemble into free tubulin molecules, leaving the neurite stripped of its supporting structure. Ultimately, both the developing neurite and its growth cone collapse, and some denuded neurofibrils form aggregates or tangles, as depicted here. Shown here is a neurite growth cone stained specifically for tubulin and actin, before and after mercury exposure. Note that the mercury has caused disintegration of tubulin microtubule structure. These new findings reveal important visual evidence as to how mercury causes neurodegeneration. More importantly, this study provides the first direct evidence that low-level mercury exposure is indeed a precipitating factor that can initiate this neurodegenerative process within the brain.
For a number of years, the statistically accepted rate of autism was about 1 in 150. However, some of the most recent statistics suggest that autism rates in the United States have now conservatively increased to 1 in 63. This was the shocking conclusion from the 2007 survey results from the National Survey of Children's Health, NSCH, which reveals a 100% increase in parent-reported cases of autism spectrum disorders, ASD, compared to their 2003 survey. That's a 100% increase in 4 years. A similar British study puts the current UK autism rate at 1 in 83 children. The vaccine for human papillomavirus, or HPV, is for preventing cervical cancer. In a move that was bold even for big pharmaceutical companies and the CDC, vaccine advocates are now recommending that boys receive the HPV vaccine as well, even though they don't have a cervix. That adds approximately 100% more possible patients to the HPV vaccine recipient roster. Does someone smell profit? A new study has shown that giving hepatitis B vaccine to newborn baby boys more than triples their risk of developing an autism spectrum disorder. The study's authors used U.S. probability samples obtained from National Health Interview Survey, NHIS, from 1997 through 2002 datasets. The conclusion states, findings suggest that U.S. male neonates vaccinated with hepatitis B vaccine had a 3-fold greater risk of ASD. The authors also noted that an earlier study by them found that hepatitis B vaccination was associated with receipt of early intervention and special education services. The new study used a different database than their earlier study, and they found the same results, suggesting a validation of their findings. Routine use of the hepatitis B vaccine for all newborns began in 1992, despite the fact that there was absolutely no logical argument for this vaccination. Do newborn babies really need the hepatitis B vaccine? Well, hepatitis B is about as difficult to catch as HIV/AIDS. Namely, You nearly always need to have blood or sexual contact of some sort to contract it. So why the rush to vaccinate at the most susceptible of developmental stages, years before sex is even a fleeting thought, let alone a possibility for children? And as for blood, aren't transfusions screened for such diseases? Doesn't this just sound like another case of pharmaceutical companies putting profits over ours and our families' health? One recent study found that children who received the hepatitis B vaccine were 50% more likely to develop central nervous system inflammatory demyelination than children who did not receive the vaccine. GlaxoSmithKline's Enerex-B brand of the hepatitis vaccine was shown to be the worst of the bunch, increasing the risk of demyelination by 74%. It also nearly tripled the risk of developing multiple sclerosis in genetically susceptible people. Deceivingly, Enerex-B was licensed and heavily advertised as a thimerosal mercury-free version of the vaccine starting in January of 2007. However, all formulations contain approximately 0.5 milligrams of aluminum per milliliter of vaccine in its place, which studies show may be even worse than mercury when considering its link with Alzheimer's and other neurological disorders. And this would also rationally explain the newly unexplained occurrences of early-onset Alzheimer's disease appearing in teenagers in the last few years. So the real question on everyone's mind is mandatory vaccination possible? To answer this question, let's look at the government's own legislation. In 1946, the U.S. Public Health Service was established and Executive Order 9708 was signed, listing the communicable diseases where quarantines can be used. In 1946 and 2003, cholera, diphtheria, tuberculosis, typhoid, smallpox, yellow fever, and viral hemorrhagic fevers were added to the list. On April 4, 2003, Executive Order 13295 added SARS to the forced vaccination list. Then, on April 1, 2005, Executive Order 13295 added influenza caused by novel or re-emergent influenza viruses that are causing or have the potential to cause a pandemic. The President gave the Secretary of Health and Human Services the power to quarantine at his or her discretion. The Secretary of Health and Human Services now has the power to arrange for the apprehension and examination of persons reasonably thought to be infected. A cough or a fever could put a person at risk for being quarantined for an extended period of time without recourse. On January 28, 2003, Project BioShield was introduced during Bush's State of the Union address. This created permanent and indefinite funding authority to develop medical countermeasures. The National Institutes of Health was given the authority to speed approval of drugs and vaccines. Emergency approval of fast-tracked drugs and vaccines can now be given without the regular course of safety testing. On December 17, 2006, Division E, the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, was created. This was added as an addendum to the Defense Appropriations Bill, H.R. 2863, at 11:20 p.m. on a Saturday night, long after House committee members had signed off on the bill and gone home for the holidays. Under Section B, Paragraph 1, it states, "The Secretary of Health and Human Services can make a determination that a disease, health condition, or threat constitutes a public health emergency. He or she may then recommend the manufacture, testing, development, administration, or use of one or more covered countermeasures." A covered countermeasure is defined as a pandemic product, vaccine, or drug. This act also provides complete liability protection for all drugs, vaccines, or biological products deemed a covered countermeasure and used for an outbreak of any kind. Complete liability protection has been given to drug companies for any product used for any public health emergency declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Pharmaceutical corporations are now protected from all accountability unless criminal intent to do harm can be proven by the injured party. They are protected from liability even if they know the drug will be harmful to your health. You, however, have no protection or recourse at all from a government who stands to profit from forced mandatory vaccination.
If we've asked for U.S. attorneys' opinions, is it illegal to create a recreated, weaponized 1918 virus? Is what Taubenberger's team doing, is it illegal? They always respond, no, under the guidelines of the U.S. Department of Defense, it's not illegal at all. They have the rights and the abilities to do that. And it's not illegal to create a vaccine to fight against it. Just look at what happened in anthrax during the Gulf War. We supplied the anthrax to Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and so when we go in there, we have to get vaccines for all of our soldiers to protect against the weapon that we created for them. Okay, so it's not illegal to do all that. In fact, the military wants those vaccines to have in stockpile, so that's not illegal.
Now, shockingly, this isn't the only time that we can see in the U.S. Code where the government feels it has the right to poison, irradiate, and use humans as test subjects. Let's take a look at some of these in the U.S. Code. Let's look at Title 50, Chapter 32. Listed as the Chemical and Biological Warfare Program, we go to Section 1520A, where the government lists restrictions on use of human subjects for testing of chemical or biological agents. Part A reads Prohibited Activities. The Secretary of Defense may not conduct, directly or by contract, 1. Any test or experiment involving the use of a chemical agent or biological agent on a civilian population, or 2. Any other testing of a chemical agent or biological agent on human subjects. Well, that certainly sounds like a good thing until we read Part B. Under exceptions, it states, subject to subsections C, D, and E of this section, the prohibition in subsection A of this section does not apply to a test or experiment carried out for any of the following purposes. 1. Any peaceful purpose that is related to a medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research activity. Remember, we're talking about humans like you and me here. 2. Any purpose that is directly related to protection against toxic chemicals or biological weapons and agents. And 3. Any law enforcement purpose, including any purpose related to riot control. Under Part C, it states, informed consent required, and this is very important. The Secretary of Defense may conduct a test or experiment described in subsection B of this section only if informed consent to the testing was obtained from each human subject in advance of the testing on that subject. Now, it is important to note here that your consent is always assumed in all of these experiments. The only way to protest this type of treatment, irradiation, and chemical exposure by your government is to verbally and in writing not consent. Again, consent is always assumed. And because you are fooled into voting for representatives, your consent is granted by Congress. Under Part D, prior notice to Congress, not later than 30 days after the date of final approval within the Department of Defense of plans for any experiment to study or be conducted by the Department of Defense, whether directly or under contract, involving the use of human subjects for the testing of a chemical agent or biological agent, the Secretary of Defense shall submit to the Committee on Armed Services of the Senate and the Committee on Armed Services of the House of Representatives a report stating forth a full accounting of those plans, and the experiment or study may then be conducted only after the end of the 30-day period, beginning on the date such report is received by those committees. Again, your consent to be tested on is being granted by your congressmen and your senators, and generally with the full knowledge and comprehension of the governor of your state. In Part E, the U.S. Code actually defines what a biological agent is. In this section, the term biological agent means any microorganism, including bacteria, viruses like the flu virus, fungi, rickettsia, or protozoa, pathogen or infectious substance, and any naturally occurring bioengineered or synthesized component of any such microorganism, pathogen or infectious substance, whatever its origin or method of production, like the re-engineered, recombined flu virus, that is capable of causing death, disease, or other biological malfunction in a human, an animal, a plant, or another living organism. Deterioration of food, water, equipment, supplies, or materials of any kind, or deleterious alteration of the environment. So the government just gave its permission to kill, disease, or make to malfunction the human, animal, plant, or other living organism's body. They've given their permission to deteriorate our food, water, equipment, supplies, and materials of any kind, and they've given their permission to alter our environment. This is your government. And these are the same people who want to vaccinate you, and passing laws to force vaccinate you and your children. Under Section 1519, labeled Lethal Binary Chemical Munitions, and under Paragraph A, it states, notwithstanding any other provision of law, none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this or any other act shall be used for the purpose of production of lethal binary chemical munitions, unless the President certifies to Congress that the production of such munitions is essential to the national interest, and submits a full report thereon to the President of the Senate, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives as far in advance of the production of such munitions as is practicable. And what is the definition of lethal binary chemical munitions? Simply, they are 1. Any toxic chemical, solid, liquid, or gas, which, through its chemical properties, is intended to be used to produce injury or death to human beings. Or 2. Any unique device, instrument, apparatus, or contrivance, including any components or accessories thereof, intended to be used to disperse or otherwise disseminate any such toxic chemical. Again, your government is allowing itself to harm you with any toxic chemical, solid, liquid, or gas, dispersed from any device, instrument, apparatus, etc. And these are the people that we are hoping are protecting us from vaccination, injury, infection, and death. Moving on to Section 1515, listed as suspension and presidential authorization, we read that after November 19, 1969, the operation of this chapter or any portion thereof may be suspended by the President during the period of any war declared by Congress and during the period of any national emergency declared by Congress or by the President. Note here that a national emergency was certainly declared for the so-called swine flu outbreak of 2009, and that state of emergency has not, to this date, been relieved. Under Section 1516, titled Delivery Systems, it states that none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this Act shall be used for the procurement of delivery systems specifically designed to disseminate lethal chemical or any biological warfare agents, or for the procurement of delivery system parts or components specifically designed for such purpose, unless the President shall certify to the Congress that such procurement is essential to the safety and security of the United States. Under Section 1512, titled Transportation, Open-Air Testing, and Disposal, Presidential Determination Report to Congress, Notice to Congress and State Governors, it states that none of the funds authorized to be appropriated by this Act or any other act may be used for the transportation of any lethal chemical or any biological warfare agent to or from any military installation in the United States, or the open-air testing of any such agent within the United States, or the disposal of any such agent within the United States, until the following procedures have been implemented. 1. The Secretary of Defense has determined that the transportation or testing proposed to be made is necessary in the interests of national security. 2. The Secretary has brought the particulars of the proposed transportation, testing, or disposal to the attention of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who in turn may direct the Surgeon General of the Public Health Service and other qualified persons to review such particulars with respect to any hazards to public health and safety which such transportation, testing, or disposal may pose, and to recommend what precautionary measures are necessary to protect the public health and safety. And 3. The Secretary has implemented any precautionary measures recommended in accordance with paragraph 2 above, including, where practical, detoxification of any such agent, if such agent is to be transported to or from a military installation for disposal, provided, however, that in the event the Secretary finds the recommendations submitted by the Surgeon General would have the effect of preventing the proposed transportation, testing, or disposal, the President may determine that overriding considerations of national security require such transportation, testing, or disposal be conducted. Any transportation, testing, or disposal conducted pursuant to such presidential determination shall be carried out in the safest practicable manner, and the President shall report his determination and an explanation thereof to the President of the Senate, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives as far in advance as practicable. And 4. The Secretary has provided notification that the transportation, testing, or disposal will take place, except where a presidential determination has been made, a. to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives at least 10 days before any such transportation will be commenced, and at least 30 days before any such testing or disposal will be commenced. And b. to the governor of any state through which such agents will be transported, such notification to be provided appropriately in advance of any such transportation. And then there's Title 18, Part 1. Under Chapter 113B, we come to terrorism. Under Section 2332H, titled Radiological Dispersal Devices, we find out that the government can in fact irradiate us anytime it wants to. Under Paragraph A, Section 1, it states that in general, except as provided in Paragraph 2, it shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly produce, construct, otherwise acquire, transfer, directly or indirectly, receive, possess, import, export, or use, or possess and threaten to use, a. any weapon that is designed or intended to release radiation or radioactivity at a level dangerous to human life, or b. any device or other object that is capable of or designed or intended to endanger human life through the release of radiation or radioactivity. Once again, that sounds fantastic. But in Part 2, it states, exception. This subsection does not apply with respect to A. Conduct by or under the authority of the United States or any department or agency thereof, or conduct pursuant to the terms of a contract with the United States or any department or agency thereof. One example of this would be the Department of Transportation and the Department of Homeland Security now using full-body radiation scanners in airports, requiring you to pass through these DNA-destroying machines, which provably cause cancer, with the full protection of the U.S. government under Title 18. Again, the public has no recourse against this type of action taken by your supposedly representative government, especially under a national emergency. Now, to be perfectly clear, the United States federal government has given itself permission to commit terrorist acts upon not only the American people, but against the entirety of the population of this planet, human, animal, and other. It is also giving its permission to any person, entity, or private or public corporation to use what the U.S. Code defines as terrorism through their purposeful release of radiation or of radiological materials under government contract. To be clear, this is legalized terrorism. Do you understand? The U.S. government is legally a self-proclaimed terrorist by its own law of admission in Title 18 of the U.S. Code. This is your America. Now, Thomas Jefferson, the main author of the Constitution,